Good morning. Welcome to the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall. I'm Kim McCleary, President and CEO, and I am very pleased to introduce today's live stream discussion on the new world of work with author Kian Gohar. Kian is former Executive Director of the XPRIZE Foundation and Singularity University. He has coached a number of Fortune 500 employee teams on leadership and innovation. He will talk about radical adaptability and the success characteristics of remote teams with our moderator, Dr. Renee White Fraser, who is CEO of Fraser Communications. Kian and Renee, it's time for me to bring you on. Everybody is looking forward to your excellent advice on this very important topic. Hi, Kian.
Hi, Kim. Great to be here with you. Thank you for hosting me.
Hi, Kian. It's delighted to see you. Let me see if I can get myself on camera.
Hi, Renee.
Hi, I'm just not going on. I'm going to have to get the invitation from people. There we go. Oops. Hi, Kian. There we go.
It's so good to see you, Renee.
Thank you. Good to see you also in this virtual world. Well, I'm excited to talk about this radical adaptability. The book that has been written by Kian and his colleagues is called Competing in the New World of Work. And as a business owner, I own an advertising agency and have a radio show on KABC called Why Women. I have found that we've all had to adapt to this new world. The book is fascinating. And thank you, Kian, for coming on to share your insights from the book. Well, let me just tell the audience what we're going to cover. The book has very practical tips in it, and it causes us all to pause as we think about how we operate our businesses. We're going to feature 4 areas. The first is all about collaboration. What does it take to collaborate in this new environment and this new world? Secondly, how do we future-proof our business model? How do we now become adaptable as we accept change that the pandemic has brought us and new learning? The third is how do you supercharge your purpose? And then Lego block workforce. What adaptations do we have to make to the workforce? So Kian, I would like to start by talking about how the workplace has changed and why you wrote this book.
Well, thanks, Renee, for that wonderful setup. We started this project a little over 19 months ago in the height of the pandemic because we were trying to understand very quickly how organizations and leaders were adapting. And so we were all locked down at home, and we wanted to create a best practice guide for peers to learn from each other while everybody was locked in at home. And then very soon after that, we had the summer of racial justice, and very quickly we realized that the world of work was never going to be the same again as it was before 2020. And so we led this 18-month research project with Harvard Business School to try to figure out how teams, the most successful teams in the world, were changing. And we interviewed over 2,000 executives, entrepreneurs, change makers, nonprofit leaders, and we identified these 4 characteristics that we believe every team needs to develop to succeed in this new environment. Now, as business leaders, I think we're all familiar with what's happening now with the Great Resignation.
Right.
The reality is that employees have become really consumers of work, and they're looking for workplaces that match their post-pandemic expectations. And if we continue to hold on to the old ways of doing work, I promise we'll continue to struggle with this disruption. And so we wanted to write a very practical how-to guide to be able to apply some of these methodologies so that you can succeed in this new era.
Well, one very practical question that all of us are asking is how do we adapt within the pandemic to get people to come back to the office, or how do we accept work from home? And one of the phrases that you shared with me that really rang true is that we have to look for outcomes more than presenteeism. Right? Our old model was walk down the hall. I have 28 people. I could see them all doing their work and know everything was going fine. We've had to let that go. And what does that mean from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, I love this idea of going back to the office. We've been trying to struggle with this for the last 18 months, and I don't think we'll ever go back to work because that world is done. I think we can only go forward to work. And I think this idea that mainstream press has really created around whether we work only virtually or whether we work only in the physical office is a false dichotomy. I think there are different ways of working. And I think one of the main things the pandemic did in all of our lives was it made us reassess our own assumptions of how we live and how we work. But we never truly reassessed assumptions around how we collaborate. And previously, collaboration was all about getting everybody into the same board meeting, boardroom, or office and figuring out how to ideate. And the pandemic made it very, very clear that it's not where you work, but rather how you show up to work. To be able to collaborate. And so we create a new methodology for best practice based on all this research, which is how do you think about collaborating in a way that maximizes inclusion by creating new asynchronous digital tools that are very simple to use, that allows a lot of people to have input into ideation around a particular exercise. And it's no longer just the people who are in your own specific office, but they can be placed anywhere. They can be working at home, they can be working hybrid, some of the times at home or sometimes in the office. They can be working remote in another part of the world. I have a very distributed team that we use in the Philippines and Mexico and the East Coast of the United States. And so it's about rewiring how we think as leaders and managers what collaboration means. It's not just getting into a room again and whiteboarding and having a meeting. I think actually starting a meeting is a terrible idea if you want to try to collaborate and innovate. There are many asynchronous tools that you can use to start that innovation process first and empower everybody on your team to create these new ideas, and then identify what the problems are and only call meetings to solve those problems.
Well, let's talk about a practical way this can be done. I know in the book you cite some research that 74% of team members are conflict avoidant, right? And they don't even have the courage sometimes to speak their minds. In a virtual world where people can be, as you said, all around the world when they're working together, how do you accommodate those people? How do you help them feel part of the culture and part of the team to get them to speak up?
I love that conversation. So I've seen many companies, as we've all done, see town hall meetings by CEOs or leaders in terms of all company meetings. Let's talk about this particular issue. In those kinds of conversations, it's very like hierarchical. It's very linear, top down. And in this new world of work, we realized that our accountability is not just up down in terms of our leaders, but also peer to peer. So whenever practically you call a meeting, let's say to your entire company or whatever your entire team is, what I want you to do is to only devote 15 minutes, the first, let's say 25% of your meeting, to having that all town or all company conversation. Then I want you to go into a specific practice, which is breaking out your team into Zoom rooms, very small Zoom rooms, or Microsoft Teams if you want, no more than 3 people, and spend the majority of your time within that small group environment and ask your teams in those small Zoom rooms to discuss whatever that topic is. Because I promise you, in a very small environment like that, you're going to get a lot more voices heard, people who may not ordinarily be comfortable speaking at a all-company meeting. They're much more comfortable with this kind of level of psychological safety to voice their opinions. And then when you finish that major section of a small Zoom room environment, you come back to the main meeting room, and then you have people share back. Our research found that the drop-off and willingness to share goes down very, very slightly after you go from a small Zoom room to like a larger meeting. So this is a great way to get a lot more voices included in the conversation around whatever topic you're trying to resolve.
I like that. Okay, small group meetings makes a lot of sense to be able to listen to others. What about this idea of breaking through silos? You know, I work with large companies and I see that they don't always talk to each other, the different divisions. And that was when we were in the old model. As you said, we have to really think working forward. And you suggest something called teaming out. What does that mean?
Teaming out means the exact same thing that we did in terms of going into a small Zoom room to talk with individuals on your specific team, but maximizing that and taking out to people outside of your organization or outside your immediate team to be able to get new ideas that might solve the particular problem better. You can say, I want to team out to outside of my organization, talk to my vendors, talk to my suppliers, because I found so many new ways of innovation that happened in the pandemic when people relied on individuals who were outside their organization or existing team. I'll give you an example. So General Motors is a client that we did a lot of research with, and typically, they would invite 12 people to solve a particular problem to a meeting, and it took them weeks to schedule the right people to come to the meeting, and then they came to the meeting. And how often have you been in that meeting and realized, well, you don't have the right people who are supposed to be in that meeting, and then you reschedule it, and it's another like long decision-making cycle.
Right.
What General Motors did with our methodology of teaming out, they actually created a asynchronous Google Doc that allowed people to be invited who were outside this core group of 12. So now this got expanded to about 35 people who weren't part of this initial team, and they were able to actually comment on this problem set using a Google Doc on the cloud to be able to ideate these new solutions. And of those 35 people, there were only 4 people who were originally invited to that team group meeting who had really good insights, and another 6 people who weren't invited to that initial 12-person meeting had dramatic insights that changed the way that this problem was solved. So instead of just calling a meeting of who you think should be just in the room, teaming out means how do you go beyond that, beyond your existing team, to rely on partners, other individuals in the organization, maybe supply chain partners, to help you ideate these new ways of working.
I like that. I think, I've had employees in India, Hawaii, other places, but there are other experts I could have brought in. You're absolutely right. Teaming out, so finding other people, taking advantage of the Zoom or Teams opportunity that you have. Let's switch over now and talk about future-proofing your business model. We all have to, I think, rethink our business models. You mentioned, I think there was a 2020 Dell study that 80% of businesses have changed their business model in the last in the last year and a half. Obviously, we hear about famous pivots, but tell us a little bit more about how we can do that as leaders. Even if we've already made a pivot, what should we really be reconsidering as we look at the future?
Yeah, I think that's a great study you bring up, and a lot of your listeners and audience on this call will probably say, I've innovated a lot over the last 2 years. Yeah. I've digitalized, I've gone on Zoom, I've created new ways of working, and I'm exhausted. I'm good. I don't want to make any more changes. I just want to go back to the office. And what I want to impress upon your listeners here is that that there are other organizations who are moving very quickly ahead in terms of changing their business model, regardless of what they've done over the last 2 years. You can't just rely on your laurels. So with that, I want to offer a very simple framework that any organization can use to think about how can they future-proof their business. The first one is to do an exercise in strategy, what we call zooming out. So look out 5 to 10 years in your organization or your industry and try to think about what can that industry look like with all the various changes that are happening, and where can your organization be placed in that environment 5 to 10 years out. So you have a long-term vision of what your industry can look like. This is called zooming out. And then I want you to zoom back in, all the way into the next 12 months. And I want you to think about what can be the 1 or 2 experiment that you can run over the next 12 months that will get you from your existing situation to your longer term zoom out vision of where your industry and your company is. And that's called zooming in. And what that means is you find an experiment, you find a technology, you find a new customer segment that will allow you to try something new over the next 12 months that will help you validate how you get to that longer term vision. Now, we know that technology is radically disrupting all of our industries. So it's really critical in this zoom in and zoom out experiment to think about what are these new technologies that are readily available now that I can use and that I can experiment and build into my practice around, for example, email automation, or looking at AI as a service, which is going to be increasingly available to everybody using Amazon and Microsoft Cloud. So think about the technologies that were going to disrupt you, experiment in the next 6 to 12 months. And then the last thing I'd say is, I think it's really critical to think about the community you're building for your organization. And what I mean by that is, because everybody is going to have access to the same kinds of technological tools through cloud and AI as a service, how do you differentiate yourself in a world where technology is democratizing everything? And to do that, you have to create a community of raving fans or employees or consumers who will help differentiate your service in a world where technology has decommoditized differentiation.
Yeah, Kian, I like all of those suggestions. This idea of zooming out is challenging though, right? Because change is happening so rapidly. And then zooming in terms of applying it. There was an example you shared, I think it's related to AI, it's the Domino's Pizza example. Could you share that so people can get a practical understanding of how they might do this in their business?
Yeah, so Domino's Pizza, which I love, can't lie about that. It's a very fascinating company. They are America's leading pizza delivery service, but they don't use third-party delivery apps like DoorDash or Uber Eats. They don't do that at all because it eats into their margins. So what they've done is actually they've had their own internal delivery service, and they're used internal delivery folks to be able to do that. They're able to create a lot more information using data about the customers that they have rather than sharing that with a third-party provider. Now, obviously, in the Great Resignation, when labor is hard to find, you want to think about, well, if this is my limiting factor, finding labor who can deliver pizzas for me, but that's really core to my business model, how do I think about using technology to circumvent that potential obstacle that I have? So Domino's Pizza partnered with a robotics company called Neuro, based out in Houston, to experiment with a robotic pizza delivery service. And the whole idea for this is that you can order Domino's, and within a short time frame, if you're within 1 to 2 miles of a particular store, they can deliver the pizza to you using a robotic service rather than using your existing delivery fleet. Now, this is just an experiment. They're piloting this in Houston now. This doesn't mean that they're going to replace the delivery fleet anytime in the near future. But the idea is, how do you use a technology like a robotic delivery service that is coming to fruition and is coming to maturity inside your organization to deliver the service that you want, which in this case is pizza. So the learning example for audience members is, think about the technologies that are coming to fruition now. How can you experiment and pilot? Not necessarily change your entire business model right away, but think about how can I pivot? I'd love to share with you another example, if you don't mind. A company called Ognomy, which is a sleep apnea company. There's an amazing doctor called Dr. Dan Rifkin, based up in Buffalo, New York, who's had a sleep apnea clinic for his entire career for the last 30 years. And when the pandemic happened, obviously you couldn't go into a physical location to diagnose sleep apnea. So he very quickly created an app, a very basic app called Ognomy. And the whole idea was to diagnose sleep apnea and then be able to send you the kits so you can diagnose it at home. Now, fast forward 2 years later, he still has his small medical practice, but now he's been able to reach tens of thousands of people who normally would not be able to go to a sleep apnea clinic, by essentially digitalizing and virtualizing his business, which is sleep apnea diagnosis. And so, here's a very small company, very different than Domino's Pizza, who's thought about, well, how can I use this kind of technology to reach much larger audiences than I would have ordinarily reached in a physical environment?
Very smart. Good examples. Let me go back to your point about creating raving communities, customers. I'm in the marketing business, and I'll mention 2 trends that corroborate that. One is the value and importance of social media, right? People get their news through social media more than they do from our traditional models. And they trust people in their community, right? We call it a trusted sources strategy. It's the clearest way to differentiate yourself with genuine, authentic testimonials, people speaking of you. That's always going to be trusted more than an ad that's pushed at you, or content, even in some cases, earned media. And people want to believe that they're being appreciated, right? You like me as a customer. You want to reward my loyalty. You care about me. I have a lot of choices. Young people in particular are expecting that, the millennials and the Gen Z. I can go anywhere. Why should I come to you? So you're really talking about a trend that's true now and will be even stronger in the future.
Yeah, I love that. There's a great leader that we interviewed here in LA, a nonprofit leader, Rachel Sumac, who started a nonprofit called Swipe Out Hunger. And she was trying to eradicate food poverty in college campuses, which roughly about 30% of students on college campuses have some sort of food scarcity. And so they had physical locations on college campuses, and obviously that stopped because of the pandemic. So she said, what do we do? We're still trying to solve this problem, which is eradicate food hunger on campuses. So she leaned into her community of over 1,000 community leaders across campuses across the country to ideate what can we do to move our model from a physical in-campus location model to one that has nationwide reach. And by leveraging her community, collaborating on a weekly basis to ideate new solutions, she would never have known. She has now reached over 400 different campuses than she did 2 years ago through her nonprofit initiative, solely by relying on her community, which are people who are very, very passionate about solving this particular problem. But it's the same example if you own a company and it's reaching out to your community of consumers who just love your product.
I like that idea of also reaching out. It's that teaming out idea of ideating with other people, which makes so much sense. I want to switch over now to Lego block workforce. The idea that we have this traditional notion, right? We hired maybe 6 people in the last year, and we had to deal with the fact that they don't really have to be based in Los Angeles, right? So that's one key factor. You could draw your talent from lots of locations, particularly if you're not going to expect people to come back. And I will just say one thing. What I am hearing and reading a lot, the McKinsey data, is that people do expect to maybe come back to work 2 days a week, right? No more than 2. And that may even be doubtful in your book. But as we talk about the workforce, give us some advice on how do we restructure in our minds the kind of people we bring in and the way we help our people be efficient and effective.
I love that. So one of the blessings of the pandemic, because I always like to look at opportunity and the glass half full, is that technology allowed us to collaborate very differently with people from all across the world, like you mentioned. You no longer have to be in Los Angeles to hire or to collaborate with. So, I reach out to people who are part of my marketing team in Mexico and the Philippines, and my brain trust is in LA and the East Coast, and also in the Philippines. So there's many different ways of reaching out to the cognitive intelligence of the world, which has been really unleashed because of the pandemic. What I really want to help think through is this idea of whether you come back to the office 1 day a week or 2 days a week, whatever it is. I want to help people think why they should do that, as opposed to saying mandating it should be 2 days a week. Now, what we've seen through our research is that the most nimble companies have stepped back and said, instead of making that decision right away, I want to figure out what are the tasks that I need to accomplish in my company by my teams. And so this is a strategic exercise that can take usually a day or two, is to step back and say, who is doing what right now? What work do we need to be accomplished? Let's break that down into small micro tasks and then figure out how can we figure out the best resource that can solve that particular task or that particular work effort. And then we can decide, should it be done by somebody in the office? Should it be done somebody remotely? And so we've developed a methodology in the book. We call these decision dials. So if you hark back to the old days of cars, where we had radios and we had 2 different knobs, one for volume and one for tuning, AM and FM. So we call these decision dials, and every company has a different setting that is perfect for them. There's no one right size fits all product. And these decision dials are 3 decisions around workforce. Should I hire actual humans to do this particular task, or can I use automation and AI? Should I think about this full-time employee, or can it be a gig worker? Is this somebody who's internal to my company or external to my company? And then the second set of 3 decision dials is around workplace. Does it need to be done physically in one place? Can it be done remotely? The second one is thinking about what kind of environment do I need that? Is it a closed environment because I need a lot of focus, or is it an open environment that needs more collaboration? And the third one is, do I rely on my third-party vendors, suppliers to give me that kind of workforce, or is it somebody that I actually need to hire? So when you think about everybody should come back to the office 2 days a week or whatever that number is, I really urge people to step back and say, why am I doing that? And how can I do it better? And it's an exercise that requires thought and purposeful interaction, and to say, okay, given that we need to, this is a great opportunity the pandemic provided for us. We probably have been doing business the same way for the last 5-10 years. Let's rethink how we want to have our workforce be nimble and be able to tap into the cognitive intelligence everywhere. So that's what I would recommend, as opposed to saying you all have to come back this week or you have to come back twice a week. What I will say is that it is important to be in person at some point, in some capacity. And those are moments when you want to have celebration, when you want to have some sort of emotional connection with your team, to celebrate positivity, or that it's really required to have some sort of emotional lubricant to really get to know each other better. So in person is important, but it's going to vary for every different company.
You know, just to add to that, I'm a psychologist by training, and so one of my areas of focus is always the mindset, the psychographic, right? And to your point about having moments of celebration and emotional lubricant, is on a more practical level, you want to create culture, right? You want people to feel good about being with each other. You want them to feel appreciated. And in my case, I think it's very important to get them to laugh. Have a fun time, enjoy being with each other. That creates a glue and a connection between people. And as a leader, I think it's important to do that with intention, right? Just having people come back to the office to be sitting there doesn't count, doesn't make sense. As you just said, rethink it and use it as moments for maybe fun brainstorming or some kind of even a volunteer task, putting together, I know in the past we've done like hygiene kits to give to veterans, and be mindful about why you're bringing people together. But the hard part is, I find, you have to really be deliberate.
Yes.
Once a month, every 2 weeks, you've got to be very mindful. In the past, you could be spontaneous, but now you have to do it with clear intention. Is that right?
Absolutely. The clear intention and the purposefulness of the activity, it requires a different way of thinking than the way we led in the past. I want to offer a couple of easy tools that you can use in your day-to-day activities to try to develop this culture a little bit, and we go into many of them in the book and the research. But one great way is to do a quick, what we call a professional and personal check-in. And at the start of a meeting, ask everybody in your team, or break them out into small Zoom rooms of 3 or 4 people, and ask them very quickly, what's sweet and what's sour in your life today? So really simple question of asking, hey, what's sweet? What's going well in your life, personally, professionally? What's sour? What's maybe a little bit off kilter than you would like it to be? And the point of this is a very quick 1 or 2 minute conversation, so you get a better insight as to what somebody is dealing with in their everyday life. Now, we have this opportunity to peer into each other's homes and work environments, but you may not know that, for example, I might be struggling with childcare today because I wasn't able to get my kid to school. And so this actually creates a very stressful environment for me as an employee, as a manager for that particular day. By asking this very simple question of what's sweet and sour, it gives you a context of what your teams are going through that moment, so that you can recalibrate and say, okay, if you're doing this and this is a challenge, everybody comes to work with different energy levels on a daily basis and different energy resources, whether we have more family resources or financial resources or emotional resources. We need to be able to, as a team, and this was the key research that we found, the most successful teams were able to cross the finish line together. It was no longer an accountability of me being accountable to my manager, but we're accountable to each other. So how can we, as team members, collaborate to make sure that if somebody is struggling today or having difficulty with something, we're able to pick up that slack and help them cross the finish line together? This was really, really insightful. And a simple question like what's sweet and sour in your life today is a really great way to ask that question.
I like that. I mean, I'm sure many of us do what I do, which is, how are you doing today? How was your weekend? Did you have good times, bad times? But the sweet and sour is a good way to do that. There's another way to ask that question that's used with children. I'll just tell you what it is. And that is, what is the rose of your day?
I love that.
And then what is the thorn of your day?
Yeah.
And what is the bud? What's something you're hoping for tomorrow? It's a way to get children to speak, and often used at the dinner table as an exercise. But it's in the same category, if you will. And I think what we need to be prepared then for is for people to tell us their problems, their issues, right? And we have to adapt to those. Sometimes that's hard for leaders to adapt. But I'd like to explore this idea of crossing the finish line together. What you're saying is people are stronger when they actually collaborate as opposed to one person getting the credit for it?
I think the most high-performing teams are able to collaborate and do things that ordinary individuals wouldn't be able to do. So one of the things that is very normal to do in, let's say, crisis situations is you say, okay, John, you go do this, Mary, you do this, I'll do this, we'll reconvene tomorrow. And then you come up with like an immediate contract, like, okay, we'll do this and we'll reconvene tomorrow. In the day-to-day world of non-pandemic, non-crisis, it's not common to have that kind of team social contract. And we found that the teams that were most successful actually had written a social contract that they wanted to help define so that they can figure out how they can help cross the finish line together. And that, I think, is just really, really critical. It's not just about coaching. It's not just about one-way linear conversations or accountability. It's like we're all responsible together. And how can we be responsible to each other's success and to be able to make this particular project successful? That was really, really insightful in the pandemic.
So rather than saying everybody does their separate part, they agree on a contract together in terms of how they're going to get the project done.
That's right. So
visualize it.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the key leadership traits that we found that was very successful for teams is their ability to be agile. Now, a lot of startups run agile. They run like this every day. They meet. They say, "What are you working on? What's your obstacle? How can I unblock it? What can we get to do tomorrow?" But most established organizations don't think that way. And so, if you're able to run these small experiments on a weekly basis, you naturally have a much more collaborative team that's conducive to trying to solve the problem that you're trying to actually get at, rather than doing ways of work that you did in the past. Now, you mentioned something, Renee, which I think is really critical. A lot of leaders don't really want to think about this, not because that they're against it, but because they're exhausted after 2 years of innovation. But the reality is that this post-pandemic work environment, Gen Z, millennials, they work very differently and they have different expectations. And when those expectations are not being met at the workplace, they're leaving. And that's what's happening in the Great Resignation. So whether we want to or not, whether we're tired or not, we have to, as leaders, really rewire how we think about work and workplace and workforce to really be able to succeed. Otherwise, we're going to lose our greatest asset, which is our talent.
Yes, I think you're right. I think we're forced into rapid change and willingness to question ourselves. Many of us have already, we would never have allowed people to work from home 5 days a week in the past, but it worked fine and people are much more productive. That recent McKinsey research also showed that about a fourth of workers would look to quit their jobs or leave if they were forced to come back full time. So I think all of us have to reconsider and rethink, and your book's a great tool for that. I appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about purpose now, and we'll end our conversation and open it up to questions after that. But I love the chapter called Supercharge Your Purpose and the importance of identifying a higher purpose. You had some very good examples too that I think would help people see how Microshift changed, how Salesforce did. Would you share some of that with us?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's really critical. The pandemic made us all rewire our assumptions about how we live, who we work for, why we do what we do. And it was hopefully a once in a lifetime shift in many people's work experiences and individual lives. And so they question, why am I working for this company? Why does it matter? And the companies that were really able to tap into the exponential power of their employees to supercharge them through the pandemic were those that had a very clear purpose. Everybody in the company knew what the purpose of that company was. Everybody could recite that for you. And that purpose was co-created with individuals in the organization and not just from the CEO level down. So we have all these tools for collaboration. Why can't we not team out to collaboratively identify what our purpose is, and then how do we live like that? I'll give you an example. One of my favorite companies is Indeed, which is a online hiring platform. And their corporate purpose is we help people get jobs. And everybody in that company, from the receptionist to the janitor to the CEO, can recite that purpose for you. We help people get jobs. And so that is a very powerful tool when you are in the midst of crisis to figure out, well, what are we doing? If that's our purpose, how does that influence the decision we need to make right now? I'll give you an example. So early days in the pandemic in March 2020, the CEO called an all company meeting with 10,000 people, all virtually. And so, basically telling everybody to go home. And the number one question that all the employees had on the message boards after this town hall meeting was, well, what are we going to do about the 250 people who are part of our catering staff, yet don't work for Indeed directly in our Austin facilities, but they work for a third party? Now they are out of a job. So the fact that their number one question was about a third party, but employee staff who have lost a job, goes directly to their purpose. We help people get jobs. And so I think it's a wonderful example of how we can showcase why collaborating to identify your company's purpose with everybody on your team, and then leaders are going to actually need to live up to that and share that and be able to use that as a guiding light for decisions in times of change. So that why I think is so powerful.
I like that. I in my case, our firm is all about communications, making the world a better place. And we try to act on that in every single thing that we do and all the clients that we work with, whether it's health or a furniture company or work with Lexus. And you have to sometimes reach a nobler level. It's not just about making money or producing widgets. Could you share that Microsoft example, Bill Gates, and then the shift? Because I think that'll help some of our listeners and viewers realize that they have to step back and go to a higher purpose.
Yeah, so when you ask what Microsoft's purpose is, you can say, well, they build software. Or they build personal computers that sits on everybody's desktop. But the reality is that Microsoft's real purpose is to connect the world to be able to collaborate, right? And so when you think about, well, how do we do that? That opens up your mindset from a leadership perspective as to what kind of business opportunities and business lines you go down. You're not just creating desktop software operating systems like Microsoft OS that everybody has access to, but now you're thinking, well, how do we connect the world in a different way that allows people to communicate to their loved ones and get work done? And now you're thinking about, well, what other platforms should we be thinking about from a business line perspective? It's not just writing software for an operating system, but it could be thinking about virtual reality. It could be thinking about LinkedIn. It could be all these different things that Microsoft has gone into, especially recently by buying Activision Blizzard, thinking about, well, how do we connect people through our software and hardware? And that I think is really powerful. So you got to step back and say, we don't just provide service X or product X. Why do we do that? We do that because we're creating a much larger playing field and much larger purpose to solve a particular problem.
Yeah, and what I take away as a communications person is they're connecting people, and so many ways that can be done. And as you zoom out, like you say, you think of future ways people will be able to connect, and it does propel you right into that future. But we've covered a lot of territory. I think it's probably a good idea for me to turn it back to Claire and see if our audience has some questions. There we go, Claire.
Hi, thank you so much for leading that fascinating discussion, Renee. We have a ton of audience questions, so I will dive right in. This first person asks, what advice would you give to those people who are over 50 to adjust to this new world of work?
Okay, I don't think the age matters at all. I think the only thing that age matters is that it's given us more years of practice in one particular way. So we have more muscle memory in doing work the way we used to, right? And so building culture at an organization, excuse me, I'm having difficulty with allergy today. We're building culture at an organization isn't just something that happens, it's a set of practices. So how do you actually change people's practice? And so in this particular situation, you're teaching somebody a new skill set and you're teaching them how to do it. So it's not a matter of saying to them, you're too old or I can't do it because I've never done it before. It's a matter of learning a new skill. I mean, I don't want to use the expression teaching an old dog new skills, which is my dog is right over there. He's not very good at learning new skills, but I think everybody can learn it. It's just a matter we've been wired for longer periods of time to do work in a particular way. And one great way to do it is if you have a younger individual on your team or in your organization who is very good with digital tools or a different way of doing it, partner them with an individual who may be over the age of 50 or 60 or 70. And I promise you that the younger individual is going to have a lot more patience to show them and teach them how to do it. And they'll have a lot more connection than asking somebody to learn it on their own.
Can I just add to that, Claire? You're right. We call that reverse mentoring, right? Partner with a younger person, let them teach you things on your device and other things about technology. The other thing I would add two things I would add to what Kian said. You have to be willing to change. I mean, I am over 50, and it really meant stepping back and listening a lot more. And the last thing I'll say is I have a phrase that I think is for our time. Young people do not want a sage on the stage. They want a guide by their side.
I love that.
Peer to peer, don't assume just because you've got the experience, you can share it in wisdom. And it's really nice when they ask for it, but be willing to listen and willing to change.
Yeah, I'd say also that younger folks are much more comfortable in networks and social networks and reaching out to different people for advice. People who have been working for, let's say, a couple of decades in traditional work, they're much more linear in terms of how they interact with people. And so we have this dichotomy between one set of folks who are very linear and hierarchical and others who are much more horizontal and network-based. And so trying to understand why they are comfortable in that space and then learning how to navigate that is going to be really critical so that our organizations do not become places where those kinds of individuals don't want to work.
Thank you. This next person asks, there's a lot of talk about changes within white collar or non-essential work. What about the essential workers, a category which became defined by the pandemic? How are their lives going to change after the pandemic?
No, that's a great question. I wish I had a crystal ball. I'm a futurist by training, but never trust somebody who tells you what the future is going to hold. I think one of the blessings that I see from the pandemic and this era of change is that we've seen a lot more focus on creating sustainable jobs for people who are at more lower levels of the economic environment and also blue collar folks. And so they're seeing their wages rise. Unfortunately, that's being eaten away by inflation. But we are seeing a lot more focus on people who are ordinarily not at the topper levels of the economic scale, having more power in terms of what they're teaching, what they're learning, more work opportunities. I don't exactly know how that's going to evolve, but I will tell you that I don't think that we're going to be in a future where technology like AI and automation is going to replace all those jobs. I don't think that is ever going to happen. I think we're going to be in a world that we're going to be more like bionic. We're going to be living side by side. And so as we develop these new technologies, I think a lot of these people who are working in blue collar physical labor jobs will have ability to leverage those technologies to do those jobs faster, less dangerously, more efficiently. So while I can't tell you exactly how these jobs are going to evolve post-pandemic, I do know that they're in a much better position than they have been prior to the pandemic. If I also can add one more thing, when I was at the XPRIZE, we launched a new competition that is trying to reskill blue-collar workers and non-knowledge-based economy workers through a competition that allows them to accelerate their learning by 50% than it usually would take time frame-wise to learn a new hot in-demand job. And so these are all based on technologies that accelerate the path to getting a job, learning that particular skill. That's a $5 million competition that's currently in competition right now at the XPRIZE. Really proud of it. Focus entirely on people who are at the lower levels of economic scale, more disadvantaged communities, and who really need new technical skills and get them really fast so that they can get these new good jobs in the future. So check it out at xprize.org.
When will we see the results of that competition?
It's a 3-year-long competition. So the finalist teams will be announced in the next couple months, and then they're going to go through a much longer exercise where they're going to deploy the technologies with several thousand people at scale through workforce boards, and that competition will finalize in early 2023.
Thank you. So this next question, I think you both can answer. So Kian, I'll go to you first, but Renee, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts as well. So This person is asking for advice and insights, particularly for nonprofits and or small businesses.
Could you expand on that question? Because there's
Sorry, in the new world of, in this new world of work, what is some advice or insights geared towards nonprofits and or small businesses?
Well, for small businesses, I'd say you're going to have so many opportunities for doing things faster than you couldn't do before because of software on the cloud and automation services and accessing talent pools in different parts of the world. So you're going to be able to do things faster and better than you couldn't do otherwise before. And that's a result of the technology that's been developed and really scaled up during the pandemic. As for nonprofits, I think similarly, you're always limited by the resources that you have, and these new digital tools allow you to access new people, new communities, new potential fundraisers, new potential people who are recipients of your work in faster ways than previously you could.
And I would just add, Claire, on the nonprofit side, I think this galvanizing your customers, your donors, your engaging those people, including the people who benefit from your services in a much more robust way is a really good way to create identity, differentiation, as Kian said, but also to strengthen your network and your donor base. I serve on 3 nonprofit boards, and I see the value of that. But people are reluctant, right? Because it's social media. I don't really know how. That's where the world is going. And we work a lot with nonprofits. It can include in hiring an intern, right? Who really loves social media, who becomes your voice and helps you to amplify that voice. I think that's critical in the nonprofit. In the small business, same thing. I run a small business, and I think it's having that customer base for sure that you're galvanized. But the other thing is being willing to team out, maybe to find another location for your concept, a pop-up that might be available. Think outside the box, with the old-fashioned term, but think radically into the future of ways you can expand. Don't think small.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, Renee, that it's difficult to think about the future, to zoom out, and that absolutely is true. And there's a chapter in the book called Developing Active Foresight, which teaches you how to do that. And I think anybody, any team at any organization can learn a very simple, straightforward methodology for identifying the future trends that will impact their organization, and then thinking, okay, how can I actually try to build that for my own team? So I don't want to go into it now, but there's a great chapter on how to think about building what that future looks like for your own organization.
Thank you. So this next person says, these days you hear a lot about these get rich quick schemes from crypto, NFTs, social media influencers. Do you think this will impact the psychology of younger generations entering the workforce, where they see all of these examples of people getting really rich really fast, but that is not the reality for most people?
I think it's, well, Renee, I want to punt this to you to start because I've got some opinions, but I want to hear your thoughts on it.
I don't think it's actually going to be harmful to young people. I think it creates a boldness and a willingness to take risk. And when people ask me about my company, what I would have done differently, I would have taken more risk. And I like that in young people. I also see this. I teach a lot at business schools, and the young people are so confident with their ideas. I do say, don't expect hockey stick growth, right? You could become a millionaire and be very happy, but not a zillionaire, right? Not $100 million, make $20 million in your lifetime. So people, you need the energy of the excitement to get that started. And I don't think it's a problem. I think it's a good thing for young people to be bold and expansive in their thinking.
I agree 100%. And I think it's an opportunity for us to think about how can we tap into those trends. And we've had these get rich quick schemes in all of history. It's not new to now, but some of these trends actually have actual technology and actual business models that make sense. And so if you're concerned about sort of how do you tap into that, leverage your younger workforce who is probably more knowledgeable about crypto and NFTs, and try to figure out what is reality and what is not, and how could you think about that as a new technology that you can deploy within your company or your organization to look at the world full of opportunity rather than saying that's too risky. I don't think we should be involved in that.
Thank you. So also sort of on the future generation of work, the workforce, this next person asks, in general, will micro credentials and certifications be more valued than college degrees, not including medical, law, accounting, et cetera? And then also just to kind of broaden it, what do you see the future of the traditional higher education model going forward?
I think the higher education model is going through a massive transition right now. Obviously, everybody getting access to information and learning through digital technologies and tools is immensely powerful. Whether you choose to do that on your own, whether you choose to do that through community college or do that through a technical institute or even for your university, I applaud that in any way, as long as it makes sense for what you want. I will say I have not hired anybody in the near recent term by looking at where they went to school. I've only hired based on their capabilities, based on their skill sets, and based on what they were able to accomplish. So those people who have the technical skills through micro degrees or micro credentials, they have the same level playing field than somebody who, let's say, went through a fancy school. So I don't even look at where they went to school. I want to see what they're capable of doing, and having those kinds of degrees is micro degrees is just another really interesting flag for hiring.
I agree with you, and I'll say that when they do that, that shows they're industrious and they're willing to constantly update their skills. So it's actually a positive.
100%.
What value do you place on the unplanned in-office encounters, such as water cooler conversations, impromptu coffees, etc.? Have these been significantly helpful in improving company productivity, forming friendships and relationships, or not really?
I think certainly having an in-place, in-person, informal opportunities for learning, for collaboration, for culture building are really, really critical. And so we can't necessarily do that in a formal way here on Zoom or on Teams, but there are ways that you can to actually recreate that kind of experience, even if you're not physically together. I'll give you an example that we cite in the book. A company called the Igor Institute, which creates they do hardware design for medical devices. They went remote and they found that they were actually pushing up against their deadlines for the first time ever in their career, in their entire company history. And the CEO stepped back and said, well, why is that? And it's because if you're having a problem that you can't solve, it's easy to go into the office next door and say, hey, John, do you have a minute? Can I ask you a question, right? And that's much more difficult in a virtual environment because you're constantly trying to schedule a meeting. And the CEO said, well, I'm going to give everybody the permission to call somebody in the middle of their day and interrupt their day like you would if you popped into their office and ask a question. And if they're available, the company culture is that you're going to answer the phone and you're going to just speak for 2 or 3 minutes and have the permission to interrupt somebody's day and ask them a question. And that made them dramatically reduce the challenges they were having in terms of online work. So while we can't necessarily replace the cooler coffee time, there are ways that, like Renee said, you can be purposeful to create these kinds of interactions that get you closer to that.
You know, the other thing I've started to do, Claire, is organize lunches. I'm now going to keep it to 3 people based on what Kian told me, but eating outdoors and being able to talk about an issue or a problem or a project, bringing people together, and also creating that emotional lubricant that he talked about.
Thank you. This next person says, while the pandemic cut back on my commute time, working from home blended the lines between work and non-work life, and I actually found myself working more than before the pandemic. This follows the upward trend in the US where the work week continues to expand. Do you think this trend will ever stop?
It's only going to stop.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
you don't think so? Go ahead.
It's only going to stop if you don't let it stop. And so it's really up to individuals and teams to decide what the boundaries are for how they want to work. And so having that conversation internally and saying, I'm willing to work until X amount of hours this day, and then I'm going to turn off my screen, I'm going to turn off my laptop, and having that kind of understanding within your team, that social contract, that this is how we operate. Of course, there are emergencies. Sometimes you have to solve things, but for the most part, if you're trying to keep a high-performing team, you have to make sure your team resilience is really, really high. And if everybody's working, 12, 15-hour days, they're exhausted. That's just not going to be a sustainable method. So you have to have the social contract of how are we going to work. And again, to Renee's point, it has to be a purposeful conversation to get this accomplished.
I'll just add to that. I think it comes from the top, and it's important for the director, the CEO, to articulate that. I want you to have a full life. We were having that problem at my company, and I instituted lunch. I said no meetings between 12 and 1 unless it's an emergency of some type. And we tell our clients that because they were demanding multiple meetings, right? We've also set no emails after 8 o'clock at night so people can relax. And obviously for some people, it's much earlier than that, 5:30 or 6 o'clock. But there's nothing wrong with instituting those guidelines. Otherwise, the tendency is to feel like I got to check, I better watch. And, we have to just set those guidelines. What I found too is clients respect you when you do it, right? We're all in this together, and they're having the same issue themselves. So it shows you care about your people. And I think it's important to have that social contract, as Kian said.
Thank you. So I know you've spoken a little bit about this already, Kian, but are there any more examples from the leaders you interviewed about how they build healthy work cultures in their organizations while working remotely?
Yeah, so one great example I love is if you go into any big box retailer, like, I don't know, Best Buy or Target, and when you walk out the store, you'll see sometimes like buttons that are like happy buttons from red to green, you're happy, you're unhappy. And they're trying to essentially measure consumers' sentiment inside their store. And so some teams are actually developing this kind of diagnosis within their teams and saying, how happy are you this week? What's going on? And so team leaders are actually asking, not too often, maybe once every 2 weeks or once a month, how happy or unhappy are you with the status of the situation that's at? And let's stop and actually ask, what are we not asking that is creating this particular situation for us? And so being able to diagnose your energy levels and your team's willingness to accomplish things is really critical. And the best performing teams were able to do that. And we go into the book in a lot of detail of how do you do that.
Wonderful, thank you. So the final audience question I will ask is, what are the most reliable sources, websites, blogs, other things that we can use to keep current about the latest information regarding the rapid changes that are occurring in the workplace, and also tools to help us adapt to them?
There's many. I am going to plug my publisher only because I actually think it is the best place to go and learn. It's Harvard Business Review. And so Harvard Business Review has many different resources for learning about what's happening, about new trends, about new toolkits and ways to, it's a very reliable academic source. And when we went through this publication process, we actually went through peer review with Harvard and academics and professionals. So I don't mean to just plug them because they're great, but actually they are great. And that's my go-to resource for how you think about what are the latest innovations. There's also lots of different journals that you can pick from that are great. I'm happy to share them offline.
I will just add, Harvard Business Review is one of my go-to places as well. And you do not have to have a subscription. There is a newsletter you can sign up for on their website. There are a number of free resources. Obviously, you can also get the subscription, but it's a good place to go to monitor. And I know that Kian has several others that he'll share, as we said offline.
Yeah. And actually, one thing on Harvard Business Review that I like is a younger generation publication that's called Ascend from HBR, that's targeted specifically for Gen Z and millennials who are not necessarily the leader or, let's say, the group or organizer that HBR might typically be for. But Ascend is a really great platform, and they're on social media. They're on TikTok. It's a great way.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you both for this conversation. Renee, I will turn it back over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Claire. Good questions. And Kian, I am so grateful for the conversation, for the opportunity. I was able to read a pre-copy of the book. I recommend it to people. I always like to take away at least 3 things from a meeting. And I will tell you the 3 that I'm taking away is this idea of teaming out and bringing in other resources. I never thought about it that way, and I should do it on a regular basis, right? The other is 3, the small groups of 3. That was very insightful for me. And then that question, what's sweet and sour in your life. I'll be using those. Thank you so much, Kian. I look forward to buying the book and sharing it with some of my friends and colleagues. I hope everyone enjoyed it, and thank you to the World Affairs Council for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much, Renee. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation. If you want to learn more about the book, it publishes next Tuesday. You can go to radicallyadapt.com. There is a free video course that I've created that everybody can have access to if you pre-order. Again, it's radicallyadapt.com, and free video course going through all the details of the course to help you learn about it. So thank you so much, Renee, and to the World Affairs Council.
You both were just superb. Kian, Renee, this was such an insightful and informative conversation. I so appreciate your time and your expertise to help us all navigate this new world. I love that social contract concept too. I'm gonna put that to work. I think that's very needed in our organization as well. And then for our viewers, let me just plug your book one more time, Kian. You can get Kian's book, The New World of Work, from our bookseller, Creating Conversations, and Claire has put the link in the chat box. So we'll have to have you both back because I think we're all going to need a lot of help over the next year. Thank you so much. For our viewers, I want to just give you a quick update on some of our upcoming programs. Next week, on Tuesday, February 15th, we will debut our LA mayoral series. This year, Los Angeles will elect a new mayor. And this series is a superb opportunity for citizens to ask candidates in person about their platforms on our city's key issues, such as homelessness, COVID, economic recovery, affordable housing, and more. The World Affairs Council and Town Hall, along with our series partner and venue host, the Ebell Theater of Los Angeles, welcomes candidates Joe Biscano on February 15th and Mike Fuhrer on March 15th, with more to follow. These in-person forums are presented as a public service. There's no admission fee, so you may register on our website at lawacth.org. I want to also quickly tell you about 2 additional in-person programs offered by the LA World Affairs Council Town Hall to our members. On February 24th, we will welcome award-winning journalist and author John Pomfret for a roundtable discussion about his new book, From Warsaw with Love. On February 28th, we will welcome the Estonian ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Christian Prick. Say it fast, Christian Prick, for a members-only roundtable. Estonia is a strategic Baltic Seas partner. We look forward to hearing the ambassador's views on the current Russian-Ukraine crisis. If you're interested in these programs, please call our office to contact our membership manager. And also, this information is provided in the chat box. Please stay safe, stay informed, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you, everyone. Take care.